Let's talk about names in The Handmaid's Tale. As you know, Gilead is the society that replaces the United States, but this term might be familiar to you. It's a mountain that's referenced in the Bible, also referred to as the Hill of Testimony, and it's said to be east of Jordan. I've included two quotations from the Bible, from the Song of Solomon and from Jeremiah, but there are other passages where Gilead is referred to. Offred. So if you unpack her name, it sounds a whole lot like offered. In fact, it even looks like the word offered, very similar. You might think about the ways in which offered is like an offering or a sacrifice, even though she sacrifices herself against her will. The whole idea is that the handmaids will sacrifice for the greater good, right? They will reproduce with the commanders for the greater good. That's the perverted idea. Also, literally, her name comes from her commander, right? The handmaids are given the names of their commander, of Fred. We know that her real name and her real first name and her last name are erased, and they're referred to as their commanders. Later on, Offred references how part of this might be because it's easy to lose people that way, right? When one handmaid doesn't work out, or when a handmaid dies, or when a handmaid gets sent to the colonies, it's easy to replace her with a new handmaid who doesn't have her own unique identity. She just has her role, right? To be the handmaid who serves Fred, right? Who reproduces in this passionless way with the commander. This might seem very radical or far-fetched or disturbing, but actually in many cultures, women will take on some form of their husband's last name. And again, it's worth noting here that the handmaids are not married to the commanders, right? The commanders have wives, but still their identity is marked with the commander's name. Later on, when you get to the historical notes, you'll learn a little bit more about Gilead's naming system and the purpose of it. Red, so of red or off red, certainly to me when I hear it or when I say it out loud or even when I see it, I see the color red, which makes sense because the handmaids wear red, not only to symbolize their role in the society, not only to symbolize menstrual blood, but also I think red symbolizes violence. And also it's kind of like a scarlet letter, a mark of what their role is in this society. There are several passages in which Offred talks about her old name. Early on in the book, she lists several names, and one name, June, that she references there does not recur throughout the text, and she says that she's going to keep her real name a secret. So some readers believe that her real name or her name in her former life was June. Think about how her thoughts on her name evolve throughout the story. A little bit later on, she says that she has to accept this new name, this new identity in order to keep going, in order to persist. Moira. So when I first read this, I didn't really see any obvious allusion with the name Moira, but something that I found out when I did a little bit of research is that the movie The Red Shoes, which is a very famous film that comes from a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, starred a woman whose name was Moira. And it's an unusual enough name that it might not be a coincidence. To convince you a little bit more, let me give you a quote from page 8. This is when Offred is talking about her uniform as a handmaid. Their red shoes. Notice that she refers to that, even though she's the one wearing the uniform, these clothes are not hers, right? They're the clothes that she's being forced to wear. Their red shoes, flat-heeled and not ready for dancing. So the reference to red shoes and dance, also the fact that the handmaids sort of evoke Little Red Riding Hood as well with their hoods and with their habits, might make you think of the red shoes. In the movie version of the red shoes, a woman has to choose between her dance career and love, and she chooses the dance career and it ends up killing her. In the fairy tale version, it's kind of complicated, but a young woman wears inappropriate shoes to church. So it's about modesty or decorum. I think both of those ideas from the film version and from the fairy tale connect to the story. You might think about how. Elizabeth was the mother of John the Baptist. She gave birth when she was much, much older. And there's a lot of discussion of maternal age in The Handmaid's Tale. There's a fertility crisis with men and women in The Handmaid's Tale. This also might be a text about environmental problems because even though it's not named directly, There are several environmental toxins that are causing this fertility crisis, or at least that's the theory. So Offred's mother references how she gave birth to Offred when she was in her late 30s, which, according to her, at the time was considered unusual or strange. And there's lots of discussion throughout the text of women's age and what happens when they are past their reproductive years. And there are very specific designated roles for women at different stages in their life based on their reproductive potential. Nick. So Nick alludes to Saint Nicholas or Father Christmas, but it also might make you think of Old Nick or the devil. That might seem sort of weird given Nick's role in the story, but Offred doesn't really know exactly how to feel about Nick. And when you get to the end of the text, you might not know exactly how to feel about Nick. Is he a source of temptation? Is he a source of salvation? Is he just a dynamic person and not either one of those things? So you might think about all of the different allusions in his name. The Marthas. So Martha in the Bible was one of two sisters. She devoted herself to housework while her sister Mary sat and listened to Jesus. And in the Bible, it's Mary who has the right approach. But in Gilead, the Marthas are praised for their housework. Remember, in this society, women are not praised for reading. In fact, the handmaids can't read at all, unless it's to read faith stitched on a pillow or something like that. But instead, they're praised for their housework, for their cooking, for their reproductive potential. Luke. So Luke was a doctor who wrote one of the 4 Gospels. Offred makes a point to say that Luke was not a doctor, but she also makes a point to say that she wants to disguise Luke's identity. I don't know that I believe that Luke was or is, we don't know what actually happens to Luke, a doctor, but it's worth noting that Luke is one of the writers of the Gospel, and Offred does reference medicine when talking about Luke. The Jezebel's Club. So Jezebel in the Bible is known as probably the most wicked, sinful woman in the Bible. She was the wife of Ahab in Kings 1 and Kings 2. And a Jezebel is a term that people use as a pejorative term for a wicked or seductive or terrible, sinful woman.